Today I'll be ranking different parts of the War Within PvP on a scale of 1 to 10, including gearing, systems, rewards, balance, and gameplay in order to answer one question. Should you play PvP in 2025? Trust me, I can already hear the comments saying that WoW PvP is dead and neglected and that queue times are terrible. I want to make this video as honest as possible, so I'll be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly parts of retail WoW from the perspective of someone who has played the game for nearly 20 years in a row. Which apparently doesn't impress anyone on dating apps. Hold on, let me do something really quick. Okay, much better. Anyway, don't worry because we're going to discuss all of the hot debates in WoW these days, including the controversy surrounding solo queue, add-ons, and even the new rotation helper coming next patch. If you're thinking about coming back to WoW, we're not going to sugarcoat things. The game might feel overwhelming at first. Even before you spend a single second in Arena, you're going to have to spend hours setting up your UI, which feels like a massive waste of time. Luckily, we've made this process instant with our add-on, which gives you everything you would ever need to dive into PvP with the click of a button. I personally think our nameplate profile is the #1 part of our UI package. Being able to isolate key information eliminates 90% of distractions instantly. It literally feels like a cheat code for learning new specs, and it completely eliminates tunnel vision. Our goal in everything we do is to save you time, so instead of needing to add a bunch of filters manually, we've already done everything for you. And we take the same approach with all of our courses on our website. Instead of needing to waste weeks or even months of time trying to learn PvP, we condense everything you need to know into bite-sized videos. In fact, when I'm learning a new spec, I will always watch our class guides to make sure I'm doing my rotation correctly. So even as a 20-year veteran, skill capped has even been useful for me over the past few expansions, which is why we can offer a pretty generous rating gain guarantee. So if you're interested in signing up, be sure to use the discount link below. For now, let's get back to the video. I want to start with what I think has improved the most over the past 2 decades, gearing. Just for some context, the only time I ever quit WoW was during BFA. By some miracle, I got a girlfriend and I was working a new job, so I decided I needed to break from WoW. I thought about coming back late into the expansion, but I was met with one of the most criminal gearing systems of all time. During BFA, you needed to do tedious amounts of PvE every week just for a chance at your best in slot piece. It was honestly terrible. The whole thing was such a mess that I decided to AFK until Shadowlands, where the gearing was just a little bit better, but there were still issues, like the upgrade system, which didn't need to exist at all, or the fact that you needed to level Renown, and if you wanted to switch Covenants, the game basically laughed at you and called you a f***ing idiot. Now for all these reasons, it was almost impossible to play an alt in the middle of the season. It's kind of ironic that the expansion based on Hell quite literally crushed your soul. But then Dragonflight came around and suddenly Blizzard grew a little bit of a heart. This was the expansion where their explicit message was to respect players' time. Instead of needing to hop on the hamster wheel of borrowed power or deal with catastrophically obnoxious weekly tasks, players would have more time to focus on the actual game. This is what I think WoW does so good in the War Within, which has copy-pasted the streamlined gearing system of Dragonflight. Today, PvP gearing is exponentially easier and faster than it was a few expansions ago, especially for alts. Players have the ability to level a new character in just a few hours and send over conquest tokens, transfer honor, and then queue without even needing partners. Oh, I just almost mentioned the S word there, solo shuffle, which we will get to in a little bit. Is gearing perfect? No. While most of your gear technically comes from PvP alone, it requires players to navigate this whole crafting system, which isn't very intuitive at first. There's also a bit of controversy when it comes to tier sets, like the fact that some specs are basically held hostage until you get your 4 set, which kind of makes it annoying to play the first few weeks of the season. And there's another problem. I mean, when you do craft your best in slot gear, it sometimes completely prevents you from playing other specs until much later into the season because of stats. And yeah, I mean, the system is good, but it's definitely not perfect. Overall though, I'd say that Blizzard has done a much better job at quote-unquote respecting players' time when it comes to the tedious tasks of leveling and gearing. Anyway, I genuinely think that the gearing system is just massively better compared to the past, and if you're someone who quit WoW during BFA or Shadowlands, you'll probably be amazed at how quickly you can get back into the action. And because of all this, I'd give gearing a score of 8 out of 10. But now it's time to get a little bit spicy discussing WoW's newest PvP systems, including solo queue and BG Blitz. This topic is really controversial, so I want to discuss both the pros and cons of solo shuffle and BG Blitz, starting with why I think these game modes exist in the first place. At its core, WoW is a highly social game designed around group play and cooperation, but obviously the game is very old, and it's no secret that sub numbers have gradually decreased over time. And if you're anything like me, you've probably experienced former friends and arena partners just kind of gradually fading away for various reasons, you know, real life and whatnot. So for a game mode like PvP, which already has a small population, there was a growing issue. Finding people to play with was becoming harder and harder after each passing expansion and could be nearly impossible for anyone just starting out. Now obviously solo queue was successful in other games like League of Legends, and it's now even possible to play online versions of Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo GameCube, which is one of my favorite games by the way. So naturally I think that it was just a matter of time before Blizzard implemented a solo queue mode into their own game, especially after it was a staple of private servers for over a decade, which resulted in a community-wide push to get a retail version of solo queue. So the TLDR is that Solo Shuffle was designed to solve a few problems, including a declining PvP population and a dying LFG system, which altogether was making it harder and harder for many players to actually participate in ranked PvP. So with all this in mind, why do many players say that it is ruining the game? The biggest critics of Solo Shuffle will point out that participation in 3v3 has gone down significantly in recent years. And I also think that in their view, World of Warcraft was just built around this social experience, and there is a certain prestige to good old-fashioned constructed arena. Personally, I love solo queue because of the way I play WoW. I don't really have the time to grind 3v3 for hours on end like I did when I was younger, and Solo Shuffle just gives me 90% of the satisfaction I would get from playing arena anyway. And I've talked to a lot of players about this who've come back to playing WoW after an extended break, and they pretty much agree. They really love solo queue because it just allows them to play the game again. But I totally get the frustration of players who feel like something was lost with the implementation of solo queue, but it seems like most of these complaints seem to come from players who have already built up a lot of social connections over the years, so I think they're kind of already at an advantage over like newer players or returning players. And just to be clear, I think Solo Shuffle obviously has problems, including the fact that queue times for DPS can be insanely long, and having 6 full rounds where healers are a minority creates this slow churn of players. It doesn't really help that Blizzard hasn't fixed some MMR issues for healers that have existed for multiple seasons. So how would I rank PvP systems in 2025? Well, it really depends. For returning players, I think WoW systems would rank really high, but if you're wanting to relive this social experience of Arena, you might be a little bit disappointed. And speaking of disappointing, I think rewards are definitely something Blizzard could massively improve on. In case you haven't been playing for a really long time, Arena titles got a massive rework in Legion. Now you automatically unlock each title for hitting different rating benchmarks, with the exception of Gladiator and Rank 1. There's also new Legend and Rank 1 Legend titles specific to Solo Shuffle, and BG Blitz has its own titles too. Anyway, by hitting different rating benchmarks, you unlock a lot of cosmetic rewards, and for most players, the chase reward every season are the special elite sets, which you can get by achieving 1800 rating in any bracket. Some of these sets are pretty cool looking, but ultimately they're just reskins of the seasonal tier set, so they kind of get boring over time. And speaking of boring, there's this unique weapon illusion you can unlock every season for getting like 1950 or something. But honestly, these new illusions are just really forgettable compared to the past. And don't get me started on tabards, which are the reward for hitting 2400. Each season, the tabard is a complete hit or miss. I mean, just compare this season's tabard to some of the ones we've had in the past. I mean, not every season is bad, but it's just sometimes super disappointing when it's literally just the color red. And there's been a lot of complaints about the Gladiator mount for this expansion because it's a bat and it isn't really that interesting looking. I mean, I guess it's kind of on brand since there's a lot of caves in the War Within, but I mean, compared to older mounts, it just doesn't really compare. And while this all might seem like a lot of cosmetics to unlock, or, you know, the reward system might seem good, there are a few problems with its structure. For one, the reward structure eventually just feels really repetitive, and Blizzard hasn't really done the best job at spicing it up. There have been attempts to add new rewards like a unique title for healers called Battle Mender, but most players really don't care. And for whatever reason, Blizzard keeps adding these penance as rewards, which I've never seen anyone actually use. But there's two even bigger problems than just cosmetic failures. For one, the way the reward structure is set up pushes a lot of players to simply hit 1800 and just peace out for the rest of the season. And this is because the next cool reward is the Tabard, which is 600 rating away. If there are more granular rewards in between this area, I really think it would help participation, but by far the biggest issue with the structure is MMR inflation. Now this is a really complicated topic and we're not going to get into all the details, but the TLDR is that Blizzard basically has this magic little knob that it can turn to slowly raise everyone's MMR throughout the season. While MMR inflation might seem good on paper, it means that if all you care about is rewards, then there's really no reason to play early into the season, since it'll just be much easier to hit any sort of achievement later on as MMR inflation gets higher and higher. And then there's this other problem when there's a new season. Most of the inflation is reset, which means you could be hundreds of rating lower than you previously were while technically being a better player. It's just psychologically a bit frustrating, and it's really confusing to a lot of people. This is why I'll be giving rewards a fairly low score, because it's definitely something Blizzard could easily improve upon. But now I want to start talking about balance, which is honestly a little bit tricky. We've been making tier lists on this channel for a very long time, and even though they're always fairly subjective, there's one trend we've noticed. It seems like Blizzard really wants most specs to be somewhere around A tier. It's not just us who have noticed this, because even Venruki and Supatis both have most specs being shoved somewhere into the A tier. And while this might seem like a good thing, it has one unfortunate consequence. The S tier specs just feel insanely overpowered. Over time, classes have become more and more homogenized, and if you combine this with skill creep and all of the crazy optimizing players do these days, having a tier advantage is a really big deal. I'm sure some of you have experienced this yourselves, like maybe your main was struggling during a season and then Blizzard just reworked some spec and it became super broken, so you decided to try it out and it made you realize how broken S tier specs truly are. With that said, I think the whole S tier problem is a much bigger issue in 3v3 and 2v2 compared to Solo Shuffle and BG Blitz. Right now, if you're playing anything other than an S tier spec, especially in 3v3, it feels like you're swimming with sharks. And I'm not suggesting that being lower tier doesn't matter in Solo Shuffle, because it definitely does, but sometimes it's kind of offset because of the chaotic nature of random lobbies. Anyway, I think it's kind of ironic that WoW can feel more imbalanced when most specs are A tier, but in some ways it kind of makes sense. Like in the past when there were more B tier or even C tier specs, it at least meant you could have someone to bully. And it doesn't help that gearing new characters takes zero effort, and there's just a legion of people who will instantly reroll after seeing some patch notes. But with all this in mind, there is definitely something Blizzard has done much better now compared to the past. The saving grace is that Blizzard is really aggressive with class tuning, and it's pretty common to see PvP hotfixes for multiple weeks in a row at the start of a season. Now, because of this, in some ways you kind of hope that your spec is either A tier or B tier at the beginning of a patch, because there's a high chance you'll get Giga buffed unless you're a DK, and you don't really want to be S tier at the very start of a season because you're just going to get nerfed after a few weeks. Anyway, I definitely think there's been a massive philosophy change from the past where you had to wait multiple months to see class changes, and Blizzard just kind of does a much better job at keeping the game, I guess, more tuned in some ways. I don't think balance is ever going to be perfect in WoW, but I'd say that these days most specs feel somewhat competitive, at least in solo queue. Of course, we have yet to talk about actual gameplay, so what does it feel like playing PvP in 2025? Well, for one, if it's been a very long time since you've played WoW, one thing you'll quickly notice is that the game is just a lot more polished and significantly more complicated in some ways. Way back in the day, it wasn't uncommon for most specs to have a 1 or 2 button rotation, but today classes can have wildly complicated toolkits. As a result, Blizzard is actually releasing a 1-button rotation helper in the next patch, which is just an accessibility feature designed for players with like disabilities and whatnot. Without a doubt, some players will probably find this helpful in PvP just because of all the button bloat these days and the fact that, yeah, combat is just kind of complicated compared to the past. In any case, we've come a really long way since classic WoW, where like mages could just spam Frostbolt over and over and over as their PvE rotation. And even though it's kind of harder to do rotations these days, it does feel a bit more rewarding, and I guess it's kind of more interactive. And yeah, it just feels good when you manage to do big damage or big healing. But obviously, PvP is more than just parsing on a stationary target, and without a doubt, I think overall PvP has way more execution tests these days, and the pace of the game is just insanely fast. With the exception of like Shadowlands, I don't think the game has ever been this fast. I mean, people literally are getting one-shot by like Fury Warriors and Marks Hunters. It's just, yeah, the game, the pacing is pretty ridiculous these days compared to a few expansions ago even. And I'd say that these days you really need to be dialed in whenever you play Arena. And this is because of a few reasons. I mean, players are significantly better than they are, and we've had tons of power creep to mobility, crowd control, and toolkits in general. So when you combine this with the skill creep of players, it's just kind of overwhelming. And there's always a debate between which role is harder to play, and as someone who plays melee, caster, and healer, I'd say they're all quite difficult in different ways. The difficulty of playing DPS at the game is really frustrating. Like if you play melee, you're gonna get spam CC'd, and as a caster, you're gonna get trained no matter what. Healing is a bit different. It's less frustrating and more stressful because you really can't make any major mistake or else someone can die in just 0.1 seconds. And whenever that happens, you just feel awful. And again, these days players are just so sweaty and optimized because of like things like add-ons, which some ways play the game for you, which is something I don't really want to talk about in this video because it's a really complicated subject. And Blizzard's even going to be scaling back some add-ons potentially next patch, so we'll see what happens with the game then. There have been some attempts to add training wheels to PvP, including the relatively new Comstomp battleground where you can literally play against bots in Arathi Basin, but it's crazy to me that there hasn't been a practice mode implemented in WoW at all in the year 2025. For many players, getting good at PvP will probably be a rocky journey, but WoW still feels really rewarding to me, which is why I'm going to give gameplay a fairly high score. I wanted to give my final thoughts about WoW in general and specifically PvP and why you should consider playing it in 2025. If you're someone who's already fairly experienced with WoW or PvP and haven't played in a while and just looking to get back into the game, I think there's been no better time to do it. I mean, getting your character ready for Arena has almost never been easier, and while it might be hard to find dedicated partners for 3v3, Solo Shuffle will probably scratch the itch of wanting to Arena, even if it comes with longer queue times. I think MMOs are making a bit of a comeback, with companies like Riot dipping their toes into the genre, and for reasons I can't explain in this video, I even have a gut feeling that Epic Games might be making some sort of Fortnite MMO or something. Kind of cringe, but no matter what happens, I don't think that any game will dethrone WoW, and I don't think anything will remotely come close to copying WoW PvP. Like, of course the game has its issues, and I don't think there's a single competitive game where people are like, yeah, this game owns, but I mean, when it comes to WoW, I really have always felt like the character control is so perfect, and again, combat systems these days are so polished, and it just really feels good to press the buttons. With that said, it would be hard for me to honestly recommend PvP to someone who has never played WoW at all. I'm not saying it's going to be impossible to learn how to navigate the game, but it's going to be, I mean, not only are you going to have to learn like mechanics and whatnot, but there's just so much game knowledge that you're going to have to learn if you ever want to be at least competitive in PvP. And even if you're a returning player, getting caught up to speed is going to be a little bit tricky. That's why I always make it my personal goal at Skill-Capped to truly help players regardless of their experience. For instance, I know a lot of players struggle with the spec I personally main, which is why I focused on designing the Residruid course to be useful for anyone at any rating. This is the approach we take at Skill-Capped these days. We want to really teach WoW from your perspective, no matter what that is. And even after 10 years, Skill-Capped is still helping thousands of players every season, which I think is quite crazy for a game that's 20 years old. Honestly though, there's been really no better time to join since we have so many amazing benefits, including the Skill-Capped UI, which I personally use, especially to help me gear alts with the brand new Bissless feature. And I've already mentioned the nameplates, which I think are amazing for combat. They help eliminate tunnel vision. They're just awesome. In any case, we're so confident that we can help you hit your goals that we even offer a rating gain guarantee. So if you're interested in signing up, we have a special discount link below. For now though, I want to thank you all for watching. See you soon.